me and my mate looked at each other and it was like, that was a cat. You could see just the way it moved. It was a cat and it was big. You sound mental when you say it, don't you? But I know what I saw.
I just froze. Didn't want to move because I didn't want it coming towards me or anything, something like that. You think, where the hell has that come from?
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Welcome to episode 86 of Big Cat Conversations. We're releasing this one in November 2022. The highlight of this episode will be our guest's close encounter with a cougar. And on the website we've got some recent footage from Devon which we'll discuss in the final segment of this conversation. That footage is just a glimpse, but it's well worth checking out. We usually refer to these cats as pumas on this podcast, but Rob, our guest, is based in British Columbia, where cougar is the main name for this large tan-coloured cat in its native environment there. We'll also hear about sightings and incidents which Rob has had with other large, potentially fierce animals in that part of Canada during his hikes. And as Rob is English and listens to the podcast and knows about big cat sightings in Britain, we'll hear what he makes of cougars being present in the British Isles. Rob is originally from Devon, and he also lived near Coventry in the Midlands before moving away. He was a physiotherapist with the NHS for 20 years, and he's now doing that in private practice in Canada, and he's not that far from Vancouver to get your bearings. So Rob, thanks for getting up early to cope with a big time lag between us and British Columbia, and a warm welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. It's 7 a.m. here, but I'm an early bird, and being on a Sunday, I've got to say I'm more relaxed than I am watching the footy on a Saturday, so it's all good.
OK, you keep up to date with the British football, that's good. And you're going to go for a hike later on today, you lucky so-and-so. Have you got snow there, the first snows of the year now?
Yeah, we've had snow. It is, for want of a better word, a rainforest, a temperate rainforest. Once the rains come, you get snow up high. Sunday, I normally go. Friday was Remembrance Day, and we have that as a stat day here in British Columbia. So I had a bonus hike Friday, and where I went, yeah, there was snow and quite hard packed snow, light by BC standards. But yeah, we've got snow on the mountains.
And I know in a minute we're going to talk about wildfires as well, because we're going to hear about the great wilderness you live in and use and enjoy. But it's got some hardships and extreme events that happen as well, which you have to negotiate. But before we get to your life now in British Columbia, just want to take listeners back to your early days growing up in Devon, because your dad got you interested in the subject, I gather, because he knew about some sightings and about somebody who kept a big cat or two. Is that right?
Yeah, so just a background on me. I mean, I'm in my 50s now. I don't mind saying that. I was born in Barnstable. I grew up there. And for those who know the area, I went to school in Braunton. And between Braunton and Barnstable is a tiny, I don't even think you could call it a village, called Henton Punchardin, surrounded by woods and fields. So I grew up loving the countryside from as young as I can remember. You know, I was down in the woods every day, regardless of the weather. And growing up there, that's when the Beast of Exmoor, I can't remember the name of the farmer, where he started to lose the sheep.
Yes, Eric Lay, who's been on the podcast, of course.
Yeah, well, there was a series of books by the publisher Usborne called Mysterious World, and they had monsters, ghosts and UFOs. And I loved the monsters bit. I actually was obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster as a kid. My father's company's head office was in Inverness, so I loved that, and I love wildlife. And then I can remember this, being at breakfast or the meal table, and my dad saying, "Oh, Rob, look, there's a beast that's killing off sheep." And obviously, as a young kid, your imagination runs wild. And bless my parents, they actually would cut out news clippings, because this was getting fairly random. And it sort of grew from there. I can remember when they got the Royal Marines in, that was a big thing. And then I used to go to a dentist in South Molton, and all around that area, you were hearing about it. And my dad did insurance for garages and car dealerships, so he would hear about it. You'd hear about the word the Beast of Exmoor, and to be honest, I thought as a kid it was a monster. There used to be a series called The Tales of the Unexpected where it was fictional episodes and they, you know, on various kind of paranormal and mystery stories. And then they had one on, and it was apparently modelled on the Beast of Exmoor. And my dad was telling me, oh, look, they're going to do this. And he let me sit up late with him and watch it because they could be quite scary. And when I watched it, the beast actually was like a man, so on two legs. So I went, oh, it's a man. And then my dad, I always remember this really casually, went, well, it's not a man, Rob, it's a big cat. That's when I was kind of saying, what do you mean a big cat? And then he told me, and then at the time he told me he knew people that had big cats actually as pets. And he also told me about, I think you've alluded to this as well, the butcher shop in Barnstable, I believe.
Yes, Eric Lay mentioned that.
Yeah, and my dad called it a puma, and he went, yeah, there used to be a puma in the shop front window. And actually, when he came to visit here a few years ago, we got on the subject. I've been living here for 6 years now, but he was mentioning it then, and he said, yeah, you know, you'd walk past in the evening and see it. He said, oh, I think it was a burglar deterrent. He said, you wouldn't want to break into the shop. Not that I think that butchers leave anything on show. But I'll tell you the other thing that did it for him, and I think I'm okay to say this, my dad was and still is very good friends with a chap called Ivor Doble. Now, Ivor Doble was a well-known jewellers in Exeter. That's where my dad was born. And I believe at one point he was the chairman or the owner of Exeter City Football Club. And he had about 50 acres of woodland attached to his land. And then we used to go and visit him maybe every couple of months. And he saw, and I remember this because he told me, because I was fascinated, he saw a black panther, not directly on his land, but he said he saw it when he was driving in a field. So, of course, we all got talking about it. And every time we went to visit, I'd go running off into his woods looking for the cat. I mean, looking back now, I kind of think, I said to my dad, I teased him, I said, that's a bit irresponsible now, but that's what I used to do. And he swore blind he saw a black panther.
He would have been taken as a very credible guy, as a local business guy and a local guy high up in the football world.
He just very calmly said, yeah, I saw it in the field, I drove along, and then it disappeared in, the hedge or into some bush. But of course, during that period, I had newspaper clippings all the time. You know, there was obviously no internet or things like that. We moved away when I was older and then didn't really hear much about it after that. But all those years, I can always remember the Marines coming in. I remember seeing that on the news. You know, it was massive news. You know, like I loved that area. Prior to moving here, it was classed as Coventry. It's almost a semi-rural village just on the outskirts called Baggington. And I remember we had a dog at the time. And one morning I was walking a dog and there was an old fella walking his dog, a local guy. And we got talking and he said, I've not seen you before. And then out of the blue, he said, there's a big cat round here, you know, a black panther. And he'd seen it. And he said to me, you're going to think I'm mad. And I didn't say too much. And of course, I said, no, I'm not. And I said, what do you mean? And then I started asking around. And where I lived was 5 minutes, if that, in a car from Bubbenall. And if you look at Beast of Bubbenall, that's another, I say well known, that's another documented big cat in that area. And I literally wasn't far from there at all. So I found that quite funny after all those years. And then I started to have a little look around. And then I realised, hang on a sec, this isn't just a Dartmoor, Exmoor thing. These things are all over the place, the Surrey puma and different things. So that kind of perked my interest up a little bit as well.
Before we move across to British Columbia, I just want to mention a very interesting report I had about last year, I think it came in. They were a few miles northwest of Coventry, so right in the heart of England, basically, and I think it was a bit of common land, and they were driving along this narrow lane through the common, and they said they saw a lynx, They kept on driving because it went parallel with their car for 30, 40 seconds. They couldn't believe it. It was pacing, at a reasonable pace. They said they were going about 20 miles an hour, they reckon. And there you go, what unusual behaviour. But it's about the third time I've heard that behaviour. In fact, we had a lady, I read out a report from Kintyre about 18 months ago on the podcast, and she said the same. Hers was a tan-coloured puma, cougar type cat that did exactly that. And it's very interesting behaviour, what that cat is thinking and doing, sussing out a vehicle going slowly and wants to go parallel with it. So that was one of my ones from the Coventry area.
And it was great listening to, I think it was the last episode you aired with the Warwickshire police. And I sat here now and when I was listening to it and I thought, I wish I would have, I don't think you can necessarily go out and quite find these things as simple as that. I think it's chance encounters. You can get evidence for sure, but I thought, oh God, I should have looked into it more.
Piccadilly wouldn't have been that far from you, would it? Piccadilly in Warwickshire wouldn't have been that far from you.
No, I was 20 minutes out from Stratford-upon-Avon. There's lots of open land out there and woodland and places to hide, and there's a ton of deer.
Now, I was going to mention this in the outro of this podcast, but because you mentioned the last episode with the two ex-Warwickshire police officers, I'll say it now because you've sort of cued it in. We have had some information from Jonathan, who was Special Forces, and he said, this wouldn't have been passed on to other constabularies unless it was essential. And he was aware at the time when he was in Special Forces in that region that there was a family under surveillance because of their involvement in various dubious things, including trade in exotic animals. And they were aware that they were under surveillance in that area, and they had two tame-ish black leopards in their possession, and they were used as guarding animals in that area. And especially Bob, the first guest, mentioned a collar on the one he saw, so that would tally. So that does seem to add up. It's very nice that Jonathan's passed on that information. I have relayed it in more detail to the two guests we had on, and it may well set the scene for what was going on there.
Yeah, well, I mean, slightly off topic, I'm a fish hobbyist. I'm a bit of an aquarium nerd. I'm into big predatory fish. I've got a large aquarium, and it's well known, like in the States particularly, that irresponsible hobbyists, when the fish grow too big, they release them locally. And if you read about it, Florida now is like the Amazon. And if you're telling me that if you release a cat into the wild, what's it going to do? Like, you look at Britain, there's so much rabbit and deer. It's incredible. I would actually say for the size of the country that there's more deer, if you like, and game available than what there is here. If you see a rabbit here and a British rabbit, they look very different. The Canadian one looks leaner. It's the same with squirrels as well. I've only seen 2 or 3 rabbits the whole time I've been there. Where we lived back in Coventry, we used to see muntjac deer all the time. You would always see rabbits. There's so much food for them to survive.
They're better off in Britain, I think, than they are in many of their native countries, including some of the Western states, and we don't have your harsh winters.
I think Britain's a smorgasbord, and also you don't have the hunters that there is here, or the US, and we might touch upon this, but I think that's why maybe they behave a bit differently there to what they do here.
Humans are a pesky nuisance and to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, definitely.
If you look at the geography of where some of the close encounters and confrontations come from, particularly, say, Vancouver Island, that's got a history of persecuting these cats. Some of the worst confrontation situations come there. Is it that they've evolved knowing humans are, not something that's you easily coexist with there? I think you've got to consider that.
Well, what you've got to realise about the island, Rick, and we're not far from there, and we do actually want to move there one day. I love the island. It's just incredible. But they've got the highest concentrations of cougar of anywhere. And I've met people who said, I pretty much, weather permitting, will hike every weekend. And they've said to me, I guarantee you will come across cougar when you go hiking there eventually. You'll come across one, you'll hear one, you'll see one. You might get confronted by one. And actually, I was looking at this because I thought, I better make sure I know that I'm sure what I'm talking about. I believe in the last 100 years, there's been 5 reported cougar deaths here in BC, and they've all been on the island.
But it's still, of course, incredibly rare, these confrontations and incidents. So we've got to get it in proportion.
Yeah.
A lot of people close to these cats and their territories.
I'll touch upon it later, but I've met so many people who've seen these things, because where I live, it's very, very close to the mountains, and there's housing developments up there. There's residences, and people will say, yeah, I had a cougar walking through my garden this morning. So, but it's knowing how to live with them.
And also, you should expect that. If you're going to build right in their territory, in the foothills or halfway up the mountains that are part of their natural beat, then you've got to expect that sometimes.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's what people will say. If you speak to anyone here and say, what do you worry about the most? They'll tell you a cougar. They won't tell you a bear. But on the flip side, they're very caring about them. They don't want to see them destroyed unnecessarily. So there's a lot of discontent about how they keep building higher and higher up into the mountains, because people have said eventually there's going to be a nasty confrontation, and it's not the animal's fault. We've took their land.
Before we move on to the animals that you coexist with and that you might occasionally bump into, including cougars, let's just hear about some of the extreme events you have to cope with. Because, we're going to see a couple of pictures on the website with this episode. Your lovely sort of wilderness that you obviously enjoy hiking in, but it's got some extremes that you have to cope with. There's some hardships. Weeks of wildfires.
Like I said, Rick, we moved here July 2016, and 4 out of the 6 summers we've had pretty bad smoke from wildfires. And these wildfires can be coming from, some of them, hundreds of miles away, and you cannot hike in them. You literally don't even want to do any gardening work. It's like being at a campfire. And, the sun, it almost looks apocalyptic. Street lamps. It looks like, how you'd see those pictures of Victorian London, for example, back in the day. Like, this summer has been really bad. The last couple of months, I've barely got out. But the weather itself here, we moan about the weather in England. If I moved back tomorrow, I'd never complain about it. Because 3 weeks ago, we had temperatures well into the 20s. I was walking around in a shorts and a T-shirt, but we had smoke. And then we had the rain. It rains that heavy here. We actually, because we had severe flooding last year, they call it an atmospheric river. The summer of last year, we had temperatures well into their 40s. There was a town, Lytton, actually, that completely burnt down through a fire. Where I live here, people think Canada is freezing. Where I live, I'm just over an hour from, say, Vancouver Airport. I'm extremely close to the US border. We have the Cascade Mountains. I'm surrounded by mountains. It's a beautiful place, but in the summers here, we'll regularly get temperatures in the mid-30s on a very consistent basis. There's times it will rain for weeks here in the winter, like literally weeks. I kid you not, like it's daily torrential rain. You could hike, but you're very limited to where you hike. And then sometimes I'm going to work every day and I'm getting the snow shovel out, clearing my driveway just to get off the drive with snow. So I almost say it's, without using the term disrespectfully, bipolar weather. You can get very strong winds as well, and you don't want to be hiking in big, thick forests when it's been windy because trees come down. It can be that dry here. They'll obviously ban any campfires, but they'll actually ban motorbikes and quad bikes because of the sparks that can get produced by them. That's how easy the forest will go up. I've hiked in the summer here, and it almost smells like you're in a sawmill. Everything is bone dry. The forest here, it's super, super thick. You can be hiking in the summer, and if you go in the forest, it's like you're going in a dark room. I'm used to it now, but I'll be honest with you, Rick. The first couple of years, I thought, oh, good Lord, where have we moved to? I wasn't expecting it.
But it's part of the adventure. And we'll talk about the sort of frisson of risk that you live with these animals, and particularly cougars, as part of the agenda there. But before we get on to bears and cougars, and your Lynx sighting. Can we just talk about the local animals that cause you a bit of grief, you were telling me, and that's the coyotes, or what are called coyotes as well. So a bit of a hassle around people's neighbourhoods sometimes, is that right?
Yeah, I tell you now, Rick, they're a lot bigger than a fox. When I saw the first one, it shocked me. So in this area, we don't have wolves and we don't have grizzly bears, but we have all the other usual North American, Canadian fauna. But coyotes, people hate them here because they'll take your dogs and cats. One of the clinic owners I worked for last summer had a little, I guess, like a chihuahua, and it was terrible to hear. She was in the kitchen cleaning up, looking out the window. This thing came out of nowhere, took a dog and ran off. And I've met plenty of people who've lost small dogs. And really, cats here, people don't have cat flaps. They have house cats here. Because also in my area here, Rick, we have a large concentration of bald eagles and also some golden eagles. They'll come in and take a small dog if they can get a chance to, a small dog or cat. But the coyotes, where we live, 2-3 times a week, a pack comes. We've got some like open fields nearby where they grow blueberries and stuff. You'll hear them run through, and for want of a better word, they sound like wolves when they go. And when they go, you hear every single dog in the neighborhood kicks off. I've seen them in the town here, and I also have seen them up where I hike. But it's like a fox in England. If you really want to see a fox in England, Coventry city centre, walk around there at night, you'll see foxes. Trying to find one in the wild's different. They're not a risk to a hiker. I've never been told that, but you've got to watch any small pets for sure. We've seen them negotiate lights on a road. So they're that clever, they know when to cross a road. For me, it's wildlife. But I'll be honest with you, Rick, the one animal out of anything that worries me the most is raccoons. Bear with me on this, because I moved here and the first one I saw, being a Brit, I thought, oh, God, let's go feed it. You really don't want to feed raccoons. They'll bring the whole tribe in. And also they can be nasty. They'll attack a dog and even you.
And kill cats, domestic cats.
Yeah, and there's a large one that once or twice a week goes along the fence here, and my 2 dogs, I've got 2 Boston Terriers, go ballistic. But whenever I let them out in the morning, I have to check to see this raccoon's not out there, because it's big. It's probably, I don't know, because they're furry, but it's probably about a 40-pound or more animal, and they've got proper teeth.
Give you a big vet's bill on your dogs at least.
And, we have rabies here as well. Your dogs have to be vaccinated against rabies. I've not heard anyone have it, but I've been told that, raccoons carry rabies too.
Quickly back to coyotes. I was hiking in Utah a few years ago after a mountain lion meeting. I came across one and it left me alone. It went the other way, as it were. But I suddenly thought, well, if there were 3 or 4 of them, I really wouldn't want to be that close to it. I only saw it coming at the last minute, really stealthy like these animals are. Yeah, I suddenly thought, well, they are pack animals, aren't they?
Like you said, Rick, if I saw them in a pack, my bear spray and my knife would be out for sure. I wouldn't be hiking lightly with that. I would be absolutely on high alert.
Sure. Now, you just mentioned your kit, what you keep in your kit. We're going to show a photo of your defensive weapons that are in your rucksack when you take out. You sent me one to put on the website. Now, can you explain what you take and why you take what you do in your kit bag?
Yeah. Well, the number one essential, and I think anybody that's serious about hiking is always a bear spray. I think you're foolish here if you don't go out without a bear spray. And I've met people like, oh, that's just, seasoning for a bear. But you need a bear spray at the very least. So I always have that. And after what's happened a couple of times, I have that literally sometimes in my hand. I used to have it tucked in the backpack rather stupidly, but now it's on my chest strap and I can just pull it out easily. I won't go anywhere without that. I mean, bears come in pretty close to any of the trails, even the parks around here. So I'll always have that.
That's like pepper spray, is it?
It's like pepper spray, yeah. you have to replace it after a while. When mine got out of date, I just gave it a little blast just to see. And it comes out pretty powerfully. And I always remember when I bought it from a store, they had 3 types. They had a cheaper one that had I believe it was an 8-foot blasting radius. The next middle price one was like a 12-foot. And the other one, and there was only like $5 difference, and the bigger one was like 20 feet. And I said to the guy, so really it's a choice of like, you've got one that's got an 8-foot range and one that's got a 20-foot range. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. I said, I'm having the expensive one. But yeah, it's a form of, I guess, like pepper spray. When I let mine off just to see, I didn't realise how big an area it covers. I got some in my eyes and down my throat, and it's nasty stuff. It has been proven to be effective against bears.
Yeah, well, let's hope you don't get to need it at any stage, but we're going to hear about your sightings of a bear in a minute. But and you've got some knives in your kit bag as well. Yeah,
so people might look at that and think, oh my God, this guy's, he's a bit of a head case. But I have the smaller knife in that photo is a K-bar marine fighting knife. It's a 7-inch blade. And then the bigger one, it's called a kukri. It's modelled on the Gurkha kukri. That's a 13-inch blade. I'll carry that as well. I'll sometimes go on old abandoned logging roads, so they're not even designated trails, so nobody will be out there, and I'll carry that as well. There's a reason why I upgraded, and that's after we had a close encounter with a cougar. Short of getting a rifle, and you can't hike around here with rifles. This isn't the US, not by any stretch of the imagination. They've got strict gun laws, but I've just upgraded. And then the other thing I have is an air horn now. After an unsettling bear encounter this year, I have an air horn that you can sometimes use, people have said, just to give it a blast and scare things off.
Actually, Rob, jumping ahead to how you feel about big cats in Britain, say you move back to Britain, now you know about routine reports in different parts of Britain, would you...
Yeah.
Well, what kind of kit would you take hiking in Britain?
I mean, obviously you don't have bear spray there. But the way I look at it, Rick, like I found your podcast during COVID, and when I started to hear things, I thought, oh God, that's cougars. And then when you realise how dangerous a cougar is, I thought, oh my God, all those folk in England are happily walking through the countryside with these things. But I did it for years in England and nothing happened. And I do think they behave a bit differently there to what they do here. But I think you're limited choice in England. I would certainly want to have a hefty walking stick because, the advice here, if you come across one, you've got to be offensive. You don't be defensive. You've got to stand your ground and really act the aggressor, whether that's like you pick up rocks and throw it at them or what. I think if I went back now, I would still love to go walking and stuff. I can't see what choice you have in England because you're so limited as to what you can carry.
But if you could, let's say there was no limitations, would you take pretty much the same kit bag?
Oh, I would, yeah, definitely. Because like just listening to your podcast, the encounters that come in, yeah, I would, yeah.
Yeah, I do feel there's a different behaviour that we have here.
I do.
But I put part of it down to the fact that they live tough lives in North America, in Canada and the US. It's a serious survival, getting your food, reproducing, all of that. Their life is tough. I think their life in Britain is so stress-free that they do behave themselves as we would look at it. They're not threatening. They're not going to get into trouble that often. They don't need to. A young one often is more likely to get into trouble. So it might go for a horse sometimes and realise that's the wrong size of prey.
Yeah.
Or it might take out some sheep, which the older ones, more experienced ones don't bother with because they know there's plenty of deer. So I think young ones can, misbehave. But I think largely once they're settled in Britain, they live such stress-free lives that they work around us. They know we're awkward and to be avoided, but they can do that. A different attitude means different behaviours. But of course, that's just speculation and we can't be complacent. It's interesting to mull these thoughts anyway and get your experience. And obviously looking forward to your cougar sort of confrontation coming up in a minute. But Before we do that, let's get to your bear observation and then your lynx observation, and then we'll move on to your cougar one. So bears next, if we could.
Yeah, well, bears, like I say, there are rumours of grizzly bears passing through, for want of a better word, but it's really black bears. And I mean black bears because there are colour variant on black bears, but it's pretty much black bears. And I've seen probably a dozen, and most of them have been from a distance. During COVID, when they shut the clinic down, I went hiking 4 or 5 times a week, and the trails or the whole area was quiet. And I think the animals came out more. And during that 2-month period, I saw 3 or 4 black bears. I have to say young ones, but I saw one that came right on the trail in front of me, probably 20 feet. I was just about to put my hand up and just yell out, "Hey!" And then it turned and went. And it made me realize as well how quick these things move. It's incredible how quick they are. You look at them and think they're this big, fat, furry thing, but they can move. You blink and they're gone. They disappear into the bush. So that's when I started to think, you know what, my bear spray needs to be literally in my hand. I think I told you this was a bit unsettling, and it still troubles me a bit. There was an area that I was going to that had deer. I found cougar sign up there, bear tracks. And this morning, essentially what happened, I was going up there. I got up there about 8 a.m. There's a small hill that you walk up, and then there's like an open area, and then the foot of the mountain. As I was going up the hill, a young black bear, what we would call here a yearling, came bolting out the bush in front of me and sprinted off. I tried to get my phone out and maybe get some video, but it was gone. And I was quite excited. I wasn't unnerved, but I was like, that's great. As I was walking up the hill, I was looking over my shoulder to see where this bear had gone. And then as I turned to my right was a large brown bear. And I've only seen black bears. Everybody I speak to here that's seen a bear, it's been a black bear. And this was a large brown bear, by far the biggest bear I've seen. Probably, because I eventually went back to the area a few weeks later, probably about 75 feet away. And I immediately started backtracking down this hill. So I saw it for a few seconds, turned around, started to walk quickly. You know, what you must never do is run. Unfortunately, adrenaline, I don't know, fear, thought grizzly bear and started running. And I was about 5 minutes from my car, and I've never moved so quick with a backpack. I got home really quick. My wife said later on that day when I walked in, I was white as a sheet, and it really unsettled me. I spoke to a few hunters as patients, and some of them said, well, you know, it could be a cinnamon black bear, you know, a color variant. But they said, again, that's not common in this area. And when I described the head, grizzly bears have a distinctive hump, but I saw this head on and only saw it for a few seconds. But a couple of the hunters that I know said, Rob, you know, I think you saw a grizzly. I very nearly quit hiking completely because when I got home and told my wife, I was crying a bit because she said, what on earth happened to you? Because it shook me. And I had all that kit in my bag. And I honestly thought it's going to do nothing against this. And it wasn't like by grizzly standards or big bear standards huge, but it was a big bear. But you've also got to remember, Rick, you know, black bears, they can kill you. We had a bad case here a couple of months back where a group of 4 hikers got attacked by a large black bear. 2 of them got life-threatening injuries. They got really badly mauled. The other 2 hikers managed to get away and call help. And when the police came, they called the RCMP, the Mounties. The bear was guarding. You know, a bear will guard its kill. It's quite well known, a grizzly in particular. They had to shoot the bear because it wouldn't let them get near the 2 injured hikers, and they were badly injured. That's the first black bear attack I've heard since I've lived here. And a lot of people that I spoke to as patients said, oh, maybe we should be a little bit more serious about bears, because everybody here goes, oh, I don't worry about bears. They'll be gone before you even see them. It's the cougars I worry about. You've got to worry about a bear. Anything with teeth, claws.
Sure. Brilliant. Yeah, so going through the list then, can we move on to a lynx sighting you had? recently.
Yeah, this was extraordinary. This was probably one of the best experiences I've had. I've got a favourite logging road that I go up if the weather's a bit bad or if I'm short on time, because it's an old abandoned logging road, so it's easy going and it takes you up through a mountain, so you still get, the mountain experience. And I was coming up and I came round a corner and it was bizarre. I kid you not, within 8 foot, I would say, I got on it, because I've gone back many times since. It was sat bolt upright, almost like a garden statue, and just staring at me. I stopped, I looked at it. I didn't even think to get my phone, because I looked at this thing. It looked at me for a few seconds, and I actually went, huh. I kind of laughed. I went, huh, because it was just hilarious. And it looked at me, turned around, and when it turned, that's when you could see the tail and stuff. It took a couple of steps, and then it leapt, it jumped, and it was down the bush, down the mountain, and was gone. At first, I thought, oh, it's a bobcat, but it had a different tail to a bobcat, and it was bigger. It wasn't as squat as a bobcat, but the thing that was most unusual, and I've tried to look into this, it wasn't patterned or coloured like a normal lynx. I said to you, it looked like it had gone down a chimney. It was a dirty, dark, and it wasn't a uniform colour either, and it just looked dirty. But it had this fantastic triangular long face, and these eyes, the most piercing eyes. I'm sure if it could talk, it would just say, well, what are you looking at? It was just staring at me and was gone in a few seconds. Very privileged to see that, because I've seen one bobcat, and that was crossing a road when I was driving. But to see a lynx is really rare. But you've got to remember, I go out virtually every weekend of the year. So it's not like I go out once a month, every 2 months. I'm out there a lot. So I think that's why I've seen a fair bit in the time I've been here. Fantastic creature. I wasn't in any way concerned or fearful.
In your area, you've got the distribution of bobcats and the Canadian lynx.
Correct.
So you could see both, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe the Canadian lynx is smaller than the European lynx, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and bobcat's a bit smaller as well.
Yeah.
We can move on to pumas and cougars next, I think.
By the way, you said in introduction, nobody here calls it a mountain lion. It's cougar, and certainly not puma. But the cougar scat is surprisingly big. When you look at it, you think, oh, wow, it's a fair size. Some of the ones I've seen are pretty big. And when you have a look, it's thick deer fur, really. It's got to be deer.
Yes, unless they're a fresh, moist, meaty one, which can happen. I would say that they're segmented, a bit like a leopard's scat as well. They're very much like a domestic cat's scat, only, of course, way bigger.
And you know what I'll do? I'll see it, I'll take a photo, I'll go home, I'll get on the internet, and I'll just look at dozens of images comparing it. And that's how I've taught myself a lot of stuff about animal tracks and things.
Well, you've got the great opportunity to do that. Excellent. They tend to start calling them mountain lions, I reckon, rather than cougars once you get below Washington. I reckon Washington State in North America, they call them cougars. And then when you get to, say, Oregon and Idaho and Wyoming, and below those states, they start to be called mountain lions. And then when you get to very south and into South America, it's puma. That's basically the lexicon of it, I think.
My middle boy's in Washington. He's across the border doing a footy scholarship at college. And we were there yesterday, actually, visiting him. And I've heard people call them cougars.
Yeah. Other names, we've discussed that on the podcast. Fascinating range of names. In fact, before we get onto your encounter, let's have our word of the week. I know we had different candidates for word of the week, but I would like to know the First Nation term for your region, because it actually means fang, doesn't it?
Yeah, so Slesse is a mountain here. There's a trail that you can get up there. It's a First Nation name, like you said, Rick, that means fang. And if you look at it, it's like a fang-shaped peak. I can see it from my house. Beautiful mountain, great hike. There's a bit of a tragedy in that back in I believe it was the late 50s, a propeller-driven passenger plane crashed up there. and everybody perished. And one of the reasons why people go up there, they've put a propeller can, they found some of the wreckage, and when you go up the top, they've made a memorial with some of the wreckage. It's quite emotional when you get up there. And they left all the bodies up there. They couldn't find the bodies until the following year. There was a hockey team on it as well. It's got a bit of tragedy and history. But slesse is, that's the indigenous term, and it means fang. And if you see the shape of the mountain, that's what it looks like.
Okay, but very apt for the range of critters that you live amongst as well.
Well, I did think that as well, yeah. And a lot of the names of these mountains and stuff, Devil's Peak and things like that, sometimes makes you think, oh, hang on a sec. Why do they call it that?
Good stuff. Okay, right, let's get on to cougars themselves then. So when you go out hiking, you're on the alert for wildlife, presumably. But is your worst expectation that you could bump into a troublesome bear or troublesome cougar?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, and I've got this feeling now, I get up this morning and I think, okay, I'm going to be chatting to Rick, and then I'm hiking. I have an excitement because I always think, I wonder what I'm going to see.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, most times I don't see anything, literally nothing. And it's just how it is. I have that, that excitement, but you also, if you hear the slightest tree break or anything like that, you're on alert. You don't want to be too anxious because otherwise hiking isn't enjoyable because you're out there getting the outdoor, the fresh airs, enjoying nature. I say this to my wife, I drive her mad. If I hear the slightest sound, I'm like, shh, and she goes, stop. And why are you doing it? And I said to her, because you've got to be very much aware of your surroundings. I always prepare for the worst case scenario. And I think if you do that, then you're more relaxed. I hike in the same way that in England, we'd walk the dogs down by the river, by the fields. I have that same mindset. But I always say, and people laugh when I say this, you have to be aware that there's things out there that will ruin your day if you come across the wrong one. So you've got to be sensible as well.
Okay. So we're going to hear about one confrontation with a cougar. Is that the only observation you've had, or have you ever seen them in the distance?
The confrontation, when I tell you about it, my two boys saw it because it was the first year we were here. So we went hiking. I have to say I was a lot less experienced than what I am now. But I was told when I first got here, watch out for the cougars. We all got told, watch out for the cougars. I bought a bear spray and I bought a fairly small knife. We actually had a friend from England. She's a single parent mum from Coventry. She brought her son over. He's the same age as my middle son. So they were 13. My youngest was 7. My eldest lad was 16. Me and my wife and this friend, and we had the one dog at the time that was a few months old. And we were hiking along a forest service road. My wife and her friend and my older son walked ahead, and I hung back with my two younger sons and this friend. And then really looking back, I was really stupid, Rick. There was an opening in the forest off the road, like a clearing. And I said, oh, let's go in and have a look. And we walked in, and we walked about 50 meters in, and we were right at the base of the mountain, and it was fairly dark. And we were just watching it, and the boys were going, oh, this is really cool, really cool. And then, we were all looking around, and I thought I heard something growl. I said to one of my boys, the older boy, did you hear a growl? And he went, yeah, I heard a growl. And then, of course, we're all looking around. The sensible thing to do would have been to get out of there, but it got a lot worse than this. So, we heard this growl. And then the growl is something else, Rick. I actually, at one point, looked down at the ground and thought, God, is it coming out the ground? It was like being in a cinema. It was like surround sound.
The reverberation.
Oh, the reverberation. Yeah, it like goes right through you. But it was only a growl. It wasn't that, I'm not going to try and do it. But you know how they go from a growl to then a more of a higher pitch, like, wow. We didn't hear that. This was just an intermittent growl. This is the thing that made me laugh as well. And I spoke to my boy about it later on. We're all looking in all these different directions. And my son grabbed my arm really hard And he went, Dad, I've just seen a really big cat come out the bushes there. And I turned round and I said, what did you say? And he pointed up. There was like a ledge with some bush. And he said, a massive cat has just come out from those trees and gone in that bush. And naturally I said, what the hell do you mean a massive cat? And basically what he described he saw was a cougar belly crawling with the tail right up in the air moving. The tail was moving. I said, what colour of it? He described a cougar perfectly. The other friend was going, well, what's that? What's that? And I won't tell you my language, but for want of a better word, I said, oh, damn, it's a cougar. All of a sudden, my older boy who was there went, oh, my God, oh, my God. And this was the comical bit. It was the only thing that was funny. Our friend, the boy from Coventry, as city boys you can get, I always remember he just went, what's a cougar? And my son said, cougar. He went, it's cougar, George, mountain lion. And George's eyes just went wide as anything. And he went, mountain lion. And my son said, yeah, they can kill you. And of course, I was like, calm down. And then for me, things got a whole lot worse because suddenly my wife came in with her friend and my older boy and went, what are you all doing? And then, of course, they told us what had happened. My wife looked at me and said, you idiot, basically. So I said, right, we've all got to go out. Nobody run, stay in a group. I took the bear spray out and I took a buck knife out in my other hand. I got my older boy to stand with me and I said, Daniel, we're going to walk backwards. I'm looking at this bear spray, Rick. I'm trying to read the instructions on it. Not good planning, really. And I'm looking at this bush where this cougar was, and you heard the growl again. And when you realize where something is, when you hear the sound, you can focus right in on it. And I thought, right, it's right in that bush, this thicket. We managed to get out the forest. So none of us saw it except my one boy. We got out on the road. My wife, rightly so, said that was really stupid. I always remember her friend Sharon was completely non-fussed about it and said, is this common then? And I was pretty anxious and I said, no, it's really not common. And I said, this is probably the worst scenario that you can be in hiking. And she kind of went, oh, right, and still wasn't fussed about it. So my wife said, you are not going back in that forest. And I said, you're damn right I'm not going back in. We decided to continue to walk down this forest road. We all calmed down. About 20 minutes later, my older son was walking ahead and there was a big boulder down by the side of the road. And my wife and I were talking and we watched him and he walked over and he went to sit on this boulder. And I jokingly just had time to say, oh, look, any chance to have a rest? And then he shot up, he spun round, he looked up into the tree line in the mountain, because you're right by the side of a mountain. He looked up for a few seconds and he came bolting over and he literally was white as a ghost and he was pointing at me and he went, Dad, get the bear spray and the knife out. And I said, what's up? And he said, as he went to sit down, he heard the growl again. And when he looked up, he got a glimpse of a cougar creeping down between the trees, coming down the mountain. That's when I thought, oh, God, it's stalking us. It has to be the same one. So we got back in a group and I think everybody was rightly so nervous then because I thought, oh, this is a real problem. And I thought we're about 30 minutes walk from the car. And I thought this thing's coming for us. So I got everybody in a group. I told them all to grab a rock. I said, get the biggest rock you think you can throw. I said, stay in a group. I got the bear spray out. I gave the knife to my son and he said, what are you giving me that for? This was my older son. And I said, Daniel, if this thing comes out, I said, start stabbing it. Just start stabbing it. I said, I don't care what you do, just stab it. I said, I'm going to try and fend it off with the bear spray. So I had the bear spray out. The safety was off, so to speak. So on the other half of the road, it drops off down into a lake. There's a beautiful lake, Chilliwack Lake. We all slowly walked off, and I said, whatever you do, do not run. But I said, if this thing comes out, scream, shout, throw rocks, jump up and down, wave your arms. And we eventually got back to the car. So the two of my boys saw this thing. That evening, I got on the internet, and my middle boy, who first saw it in the forest, I showed him a picture of a cougar, and this is where it was quite funny. He said, yeah, that's exactly what I saw. He said it was massive. And I said, what the hell did you think it was? And he said, I just thought it was a big cat. And I said, well, what did you think a cougar was? And he said, I don't know, Dad. He said, I just knew they were dangerous. So I explained to him what it was, and that's when I upgraded to that much bigger knife. I said to my wife, I'm going bigger. And that's what prompted the upgrade. So look, I didn't see it, and I say I would have liked to. I can tell you now at the time it was scary, because you think, we're in trouble here. And I thought, I've got the whole family. I've got a puppy. And I spoke to a few hunters, and some of them said you might have stumbled upon its den, but some of them said it was probably by random chance it was in that area, saw you, and then probably saw the dog, or even my youngest boy, and thought, I want a bit of it. But they told me that was a stalking. It wasn't just getting you out of the area, it was stalking you. So, and I think it tracked us along through the mountain, watching us, and 20 odd minutes later came back down.
Yeah, but good job there was a group of you, having said that.
It wasn't, Rick, because it was a group where I had two 13-year-old streetwise Coventry boys. I had one mum who was completely unfazed, because really I think Sharon, bless her, had no idea what was going on. And I had a wife that was scared and also really angry at me. So for me, I was like, it just doesn't get any worse than this. Complete stress.
Your wife's friend, who was complacent initially, when you all had to pick up a rock and go out really carefully back to the car, did she change her perception of the situation?
No. Do you know, there's bits I remember, Rick. She was holding this rock, and then she was just calmly looking at the mountain, the forest, and she was going, so what am I throwing this at? And I was going, nothing at the moment, but I went, I think there's going to be a bloody big cat running out of it. And she was like, a cat? And I was like, yeah, a cougar, a puma. And then her son was like, a mountain lion, Mum. And then, of course, then she went, a mountain lion? Because if you think of the word lion, you think of an African lion. And then she started to get a bit, oh, right, okay. And then she was just calmly looking round for a rock. My wife was holding the dog. I had to eat humble pie for a while after that.
Presumably the dog knew you were all stressed. Had the dog picked up that?
No, the dog was really young. So Bella's a Boston Terrier. We had the one at the time. This would have been about July time. We got her in late April, so she was very young. To be honest with you, Rick, I wasn't even looking at the dog. I was looking up at the mountain. And I remember just thinking, it sounds like something out of a movie. I said to my son, whatever comes out of that forest, I went, you start stabbing it. I said, you stab and stab and stab until I tell you to do otherwise. I'm trying to read the instructions on the bear spray. And I had a rock in another hand. And, I said to my wife, look, all stay in a group. And I was saying to them, everybody stay in a group, because this is what you should do. Make yourself look big. It's the same with bears. If there's two of you, stand close together so the bear thinks you're actually bigger. And that was the first year we'd been there. And that's when I really wised up on a lot of things. I really, really read around the subject. And every time I had a hunter in or an experienced hiker, I just quizzed them on it and got advice. So, and I've never taken things lightly since. And that's where I say you've got to be prepared for any eventuality.
When your son saw it creep along, when you got reverberating, threatening sound, how close do you think you were to it?
He pointed. So he basically said it came out from some trees on the ground. And then he said he watched it really quickly crawl, and the tail was up in the air. He said it had a really long tail and the tail was moving. So, yeah, this ledge, it was kind of like a ledge because, it was right at the side of the mountain. I would say 40 feet, 30, 40 feet we were from it.
On you in a second if it needs to be.
And honestly, like the growling is, like you said, it reverberates. I mean, I actually looked down at the ground and thought, wait a minute, where is this coming from? And it felt like it was all around you. And then when Ben, my middle lad, was pointing to the bush, obviously then you're looking at the bush and nothing else. And when it growled again, you were like, yeah, it's in that bush. It's in those bushes.
Now, I've heard people here. I've got a friend, actually, he has been on the podcast, and he's heard that, and he mentioned it when he was on the podcast. He was looking at a deer kill, which he was sure was a big cat, and he had this leopard-like growl from the other side of a hedge. He's never been the same since. I mean, he's still fascinated about the cats and investigates and does what he can to try and find evidence and goes out, but he's that much more wary because he's had that experience of that threatening, I mean business sort of growl close up. They're telling you they can mean business if they need to.
You hear stories where people have come across large predatory animals and they've said, I lost bladder control. And I used to think, let me tell you, when I saw that brown bear, I was close to doing that. I think had this cougar had come out, I think had it just attacked us, I think one of us, me for sure, I think you would pee yourself because it's something that's so out of context and it's something you have never heard of, but you're in a bad situation. It's aggressive, it's threatening. I can tell you now, if you heard that in the British countryside, like you said about this chap, you would think very, very carefully about ever going out again, for sure. Because look, you've got to remember here, going back to what we said, people here know what's out there. So people know that there are cougars that live here that are in this area. So people aren't going to be shocked to see one. Goodness only knows if you were in the British countryside and you saw one of these things, what you must be thinking. It must completely flip your world upside down in an instant. But here you expect, you know they're there. You know there's a possibility you could see them.
One of the issues in Britain is how difficult they are to get a mobile phone out in time to film them. People, skeptics or people who just get frustrated that there's so little good evidence, make that grumble about, surely you must be able to get a smartphone photo. From your experience, what's your response to that?
Using bears as an example, I can relate to that in that, number one, animals move really quick. Before you can even open your phone, flick on your camera setting, flick on your video, they'll be gone, like totally gone, and you wouldn't even know they were there. The other thing, I've took some footage of bears, which I thought was good, and then gone to look at it, and you see a tiny little black dot moving about. And you're kind of saying to the person, no, that was a bear, seriously. So unless you've got a very good quality camera, but I also think you've got to be composed enough to do it. And I think the majority of us, there'll be fear, adrenaline, excitement, the whole gamut of emotions. And unless I see a bear from the distance, the first thing I do when I see a bear is, right, bear spray. And I stop and I put my hand up. You've got to think of your safety. So I think it's very hard to get footage. And predators are smart animals. They're not dumb. They're clever animals. It's extremely difficult to get footage of any animal, I think, in most cases. If me and you were in England and we went, Rick, I want to get some footage of a fox. Well, how well are you going to do it? How well are you going to focus in? How good a quality phone have you got? And that's what most of us have, isn't it?
And the fox is going to be at low light conditions, and the smartphone cameras really struggle in low light.
You've got to figure out your settings. You've got to try and focus in on zoom. And then by the time you've done that, you look up and it's gone. So I think it would have to be a professional photographer to get really crystal clear footage. And I think they would have to be very dedicated.
Or you wait for the trail camera to be lucky and catch it close.
I used to treat a patient and she lives up near the mountains. She has well water and stuff. She's that remote. She has a security camera. Every week she used to come in. She'd get a phone out and she'd go, I've got some things to show you. And it would be a picture of a mother black bear and a cub. And then it would be a mountain lion. And she'd come in every week and I'd go, have you got anything? She goes, here you go, Rob. And then it's fairly good, like still footage of her of a cougar walking along the back of our house. And, so that's the other option. That's another way of doing it.
But they're going there regularly, and there's a decent population of them right on her doorstep, and she's in the thick of the territory.
So just one other incident about a cougar, and this might explain about people's view about it. We live in a town about 5 minutes away. We've got some friends, and one evening I was gutted over this, and it was during COVID. So really people weren't really getting close to other people. But some friends of my wife's, one of her co-workers, about a week, less than a week earlier, a mother cougar and 2 cubs was seen about 5 minutes from where I am. So a very, very urban area. They came out and they shot the mother and one of the cubs, one of the young, and the other young got away. People weren't too happy about the mother and the young was shot, but they were also concerned at the same time for the safety of kids and stuff. It obviously made quite big news. And several days later, my wife just came in and went, have a look at this. And it was video and photos sent from her friend. And underneath their neighbour's car was this young cougar, scared as anything, under the car. And one of the kids had come in and said, oh, there's a cat under the car that's making a lot of noise. And Kevin, this friend of ours, he went out, he's a hunter, and he went, good Lord, it's a cougar. And I believe the cops came and conservation, and they think it was the other young cougar from the 2 that had got shot, the mother and the other one, because it was probably 2 kilometres away from where they were shot. And I spoke to Kevin weeks later, and he wasn't very happy. And he said, I went out there and I said to the cop, you better not shoot this. You better tranquilize it and put it in a sanctuary. But he said he thinks they shot it. And that's the unfortunate thing here, Rick. If they get a nuisance bear, there was a bear downtown, literally downtown near a secondary school about 3 years ago, and they shot it on the spot. They don't get people out to tranquilize it. You might see documentaries in England where that happens, but they don't do that here on the whole. They come out and shoot it.
Because they don't know how long it's going to take to go to ground, and it's that sort of minute or 2 before they peter out, they can be problematic, can't they?
This mother had come right down into the town with 2 young. Looking back, it's sad to hear. And that's what I'm saying, Rick. People are really fearful of them, but they're also caring for them at the same time. They don't want to see them come to harm. So, like, if you speak to people here who've got them up on their property, I had a chap a few weeks back who had one. He just says, yeah, I just won't let the dog out for a couple of days.
Some people don't tell the police or don't tell the wildlife and game agency, do they? Because they just think the consequences, they think they'll put up with it being around, hope it behaves, but for its own safety, they won't reveal it.
Yeah. I'm on a couple of Facebook hiking groups, so people have posted pictures of cougars. Some people have been followed by them and stuff. And you'll have some comments that will say, you shouldn't be posting this because that animal's going to get shot now. So it causes quite a bit of debate and stuff.
What about education signs about not feeding deer in the garden? Do you have that?
No.
Because that is one of the reasons they will come into the edge of residential areas, isn't it? Because people are feeding wildlife in their gardens, and they're obviously then looking for easy prey on the edges of town and deer in residential areas.
From what I understand, they have an enormous, a single cougar has a huge range. They cover massive distances. But no, there's no signs, there's no education about that at all. Most people don't like deer because they come in and eat all the trees and the plants. So it's funny, if you go to a garden centre here, you'll see plants and trees that will say deer resistant. But that depends on where you live. I think most people here know how to live them. And that's the thing. You mentioned about Britain. People know about foxes and badgers and deer in Britain, but not about cougars. And people don't really know what to do and what's the general recommendations if you see one. Most serious hikers, outdoor people here do. They can tell you on the spot what to do if they see a black bear or a grizzly bear or a cougar. They'll tell you, right, this is what you do. They grew up knowing about this.
Having said that, every case is going to be a little bit different, and keeping your composure in a confrontation situation, some people could panic even if they knew theoretically what to do. I think it's so difficult when the reality is facing you.
That's it. You know what to do with the bear, but you won't know what you'll do until you see your first bear. I'm calm, but I tell you what, when the bear's gone, your pulse rate is absolutely off the charts. It gets the heart pumping for sure.
Now, living knowing that you could encounter these animals and there's this risk, do you actually enjoy the adventure and the excitement and that frisson of living on the edge and the heightened senses and emotions? Is it something which you've actually got used to and actually enjoy?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I love the outdoors, and that goes from my days in Devon. I love just being out in woods and on trails and stuff. That said, and I'm openly admitting it now, but I wouldn't tell my wife this, for example, I do have that little bit of, I really hope I'm going to see a bear or a cougar. I won't lie, you do have that little thing where you think, God, it would really make my day. When I've seen a bear, I am the happiest man alive. Oh, it's amazing. I've not seen a cougar, but I would really love to, but I'd love to see it safely. You obviously can't dictate those terms, but I know what you're asking. And yeah, I do get a little bit of you have that little anticipation and a bit of fear, but it's like a nice fear. But maybe that's stupid. I'm sure there's people listening that will think, I've been told off for hiking alone. Sometimes I go with a friend, but usually I go alone. And that's the one thing they tell you never to do. But I've done it so much, I'm used to it. And I know lots of people who hike alone. But I'm sure there might be some people, if they're listening, and think, well, this guy's silly. But you do have that because these things are out there. And don't get me wrong, you'd love to see one, but from a distance or very safely.
Is there a point about you're forced to be on heightened alert, so it just sharpens you up?
It's weird to explain. You become a lot better at listening. You become really in tune with stuff because when you're out in these places, you cannot hear a thing. You don't hear a car. You don't hear a plane. You hear nothing. You just hear occasional birds, things like that. All your senses go up a notch. If I'm hiking up, I'll stop and look a minute or two and I'll scan the area and see what's up ahead, and then off I go. If I'm coming up a ridge, I'll look down over the ridge and check out the area and see what's below, and I'll give it a couple of minutes and then off I'll go. I'm always looking up in the trees. I'm always looking side to side because you've got to. Some of these trails take you through really thick forest where even the trees are shoulder height or above. So, and then you've just got a narrow trail that you have to look down at. But yeah, you definitely become a lot more, your senses are definitely kick-starting, for sure.
There's another alleged creature in the great outdoors in your area and other parts of North America, and it's one which is highly controversial and some people don't like talking about, but you actually have got a view on it based on your experiences. So do you want to tell us a bit about missile throwing and something else which has freaked you out?
Yeah, so we're talking a Sasquatch.
Incidentally, before we go into this, Rob, listeners should know that you and I did discuss whether we should touch on it, and because you sort of hinted that you'd had these other experiences, but you didn't know whether we should go there. And I said, well, try me, because I've met Sasquatch witnesses and had a bit of exposure to the topic. It's interesting to learn about interviewing witnesses on big cats to Sasquatch. A lot of parallel issues, actually, so I'm quite open to it. I felt that when you and I were discussing whether we should consider discussing it, it would be hypocritical if we didn't, because a lot of people don't like talking big cats in Britain because it's beyond their comfort zone. A lot of people think it's controversial and they don't exist. Well, it's exactly the same with Sasquatch. So if we were denying these experiences you feel you've had that are perhaps Sasquatch related, we're almost being not true to, the real spirit of this discussion, where we're talking about real things which have happened that need explaining and that affect your emotions. So, do tell us.
Yeah, I mean, look, I may as well tell you where I live. I live in a town called Chilliwack. It's spelled Chilliwack, but Chilliwack. It's very close to Harrison Hot Springs. You Google that and Sasquatch, and there's a very rich history of sightings here. Some people say it's like the hotbed. That said, Rick, most people that you speak to here will laugh it off and tell you it's nonsense. But let me tell you, there's something to it. When something weird happens, I think you start off with the usual suspects. You look at bear, a person, even a cougar. And when you rule those out, you've got to look at what the next possibility is. And again, we'd only been here, I think, a couple of months. And this was a very weird incident. My wife and my youngest, so he was only 6 at the time, we went off on a hike. Now, going back these days, Rick, we didn't even have a knife or a bear spray. We had nothing. And we were on an old trail, nobody up there but us. We didn't see a soul on the way up, on the way down. There was an overturned tree had come down, obviously years ago or whenever in storm. All the roots were up and there was earth on it. And on the way up, we had these like makeshift walking sticks. Me and my youngest son started whacking the roots of this tree. We were knocking the earth off it. We carried on walking. About an hour later, we came down, saw the tree again, and we were doing it again. My wife was sort of saying, look, we've got to get going. I've got things to do, you know. And there was a tree in front of me, or in front of us, and a rock came flying out the bush from up above and hit this tree straight in front of us, you know, a few meters in front of us. And it was thrown. You could see by the trajectory it was thrown. Wife shot round to me and said, was that you? And I was going, no, it's not me. She was going, well, where does that come from? And I said, it's come from up there. And then a few seconds later, another one came out and hit the same tree. Like it wasn't like it would hit, you know, near a tree. It hit this same tree. We were really spooked. And I heard something moving, and you could tell it was something heavy. It wasn't just breaking branches. It was breaking multiple branches. We got out of there really quick, and we were really worried. Now, at the time, I didn't for 1 minute consider anything Sasquatch or that. I just knew that, you know, it was not a good situation. We were almost running back to the car. We got back. My wife wouldn't go to this place for years, go near this area again. I asked a few hunters. Some of them were a little bit cagey about it, were like, oh, I don't know. And then I was like, is it a bear? And they were like, no, it's not a bear. And I was like, what would it have been? And they went, I don't know. And some people said, you know, it would be a homeless person or a hermit. But you don't get that here, not homeless up in the mountains, because you're not going to survive. It troubled me for a while, to be honest, Rick. And then I was treating a policewoman, and she's Indigenous. And she said, what have you been told? And some people had told me it was a bear. Some people even told me that a bear can grab it, you know, can pick up a rock and throw it. And probably like you with the big cat scenario, people think you're mad for thinking these things exist. But to me, what's even more ludicrous is what people write it off as, where you look at them and you think I'm nuts, you know. I got told that and I was like, oh, okay. But this lady, she's an Indigenous background, and she said, she was telling me that it might have been just to get you out the area, but she said it might have been to get you out the area because there was another danger, maybe a cougar in the area, and this was trying to get you and your family out of the area. I started to look a little bit into things. I've also found a large human-like footprint. You could see toes and a heel. I came across that one year. I've been stalked and paralleled on a trail by something you could tell by the sound of it was very heavy and large. And then I've come across a couple of very, very unusual tree structures. Massive. The last one I came across was a huge tree structure, an enormous X, and then another tree had been bent right over the center of the X and wedged in the ground. And these are in areas where people aren't going to be commonly going. And I've met people who've claimed to have seen it. These are patients who you get to know them as a person and they're not lying.
One of the witnesses I met in Colorado spent 10 minutes just scrolling through their mobile phone photos of those tree structures and X signs in the trees and other signs. And it's another world, and you have to be trusted. That they wouldn't show that to anybody because they could see I was sort of open-minded and curious. They and supportive of hearing them out. They pleased to show me, but they wouldn't show that to everybody. So it totally correlates with the sorts of things you're saying. Yet, if you're naive to these things, you wouldn't know that those are the kinds of signs that go with the Sasquatch agenda. It really is a comfort zone thing, isn't it? So you are a bit like talking to people about big cats here. You would be careful who you talk to about Sasquatch because of the kind of sensitivities and reaction.
Most people I speak to are patients, and as a physio, I'm extremely careful because some might think you're crazy and never come back and see you. What I usually do is I just ask them, do you go hiking? And they go, yeah. Are you hunting? And usually what I'll do is I'll go, you seen anything weird? Had any weird things happen? And that's where people have gone, you're going to think I'm nuts, but this is what happened. And that's where I've been told quite a few stories. I used to treat an elderly chap in his 70s. He's originally from Belfast. He's got this thick Belfast accent. And he told me years ago when he first moved here, he bought a road bike, a motorbike, and he used to ride it everywhere, up logging roads, you name it. And he just out of the blue one day when I was treating him said, I've seen a Sasquatch, I said, well, tell me what happened. He claimed he was going up a logging road, and he said, I saw this massive, hairy giant sunbathing. And I said, what do you mean sunbathing? He said, well, it was just on a rock in the sun. And I said, what do you mean a hairy giant? And he said, when it stood up, he said he could clearly see it was a man. And he joked. He said it was very well endowed. And he said, it's a giant. And he said this thing got up, and he said he nearly fell off his bike when it stood up because he realised how big it was. And then it just disappeared into the bush. And he said to me, I just thought it was a giant hairy man. And of course, I was saying to him, well, what does that even mean? And he went, well, that's what I just thought it was a giant hairy naked man. And then he said a year later, he was going out with a girl or a lady, and they were looking at something, and there was a picture of a Sasquatch. And then he just casually went, oh, I've seen that. And her, being a BC resident, said, what the hell are you talking about? And he said, oh, I saw it, and he described it. And she said, no, these things don't exist. And he said, yeah, they do. I've seen one. And when I asked him, I said, is it like an ape or something? He went, no. He said, it's a massive 8-10 foot tall, hairy man. He just told me like as if he was seeing a bear. He said for years he just thought it was no big deal until he started to be told about it.
How does it make you feel? We were talking about, coexisting with the bears and cougars, and when you know that there's a potential huge primate, let's call it a primate, as well, that can throw missiles or whatever, do you go out ever thinking of that as well, or is it just in the back of your mind, or, what kind of influence has it on you?
To be honest, Rick, I try not to, because I think if you really thought long and hard about that, I don't think you'd go out, because the stuff I've seen, you can't explain by anything else. And then it just leaves you with only one other thing. It's very much an unknown entity, and the unknown really scares you.
And a bit like big cats here, it's something which authorities and any people with high status in life and official bodies just evade because it's controversial, and some people in those circles wouldn't believe in it anyway, but others who would do just feel, well, it's not for them to dabble in. So there's no sort of advice.
I think that's the thing. I could tell you what I would do if I saw a grizzly bear, black bear or cougar, right? I could tell you what I'd do. If you said, Rob, if this thing was real and you were to come across a Sasquatch, what would you do? I have no idea. No idea.
And it would depend on the circumstances again, though, wouldn't it? What kind of mood it is, how close you were, whether it was threatening or not.
Yeah, but the people I've spoken to, and I think this is the thing that unnerves me, they don't believe it's a primate. They think it's, if you look at indigenous history here, they have stories about giants back in the day, giant people, giant tribes.
Yeah, that's still a primate though, isn't it?
I guess so, but I guess the whole Gigantopithecus coming across from China and stuff, but these people believe it's an ancient indigenous race. Yeah, it's tricky. You asked me about this, and I'm not going to say no comment just because what I've seen. I'd be lying to myself if I went, I don't really know, Rick. It's all a load of nonsense or stuff. But I'll tell you now, it's not myth. I have no idea what it is, but I can honestly tell you now there's something that's producing all these reports and stuff. It adds a slight bit of excitement as well, but I also just think it adds a lot of unknown questions.
And of course, there's the other issue that a bit like big cats here or big cats, cougars in North America, most people will probably never encounter one anyway. So it's not really much of a talking point because it's not meaningful to people because it's not going to influence their lives one jot. You might go hiking every weekend the rest of your time there and never see a cougar and never see a Sasquatch or come close to Sasquatch.
Yeah. The one thing I'll tell you, it's not until you get to these areas and you see just how vast the land is. You could hide a dinosaur in there and it would never be seen. If I wanted to go and disappear, I could just get my boots on and off I go, and you'll never find me.
Yeah, nature's in charge.
Exactly. And in the same way, it's extremely hard to find a cougar, even to find a bear, Rick. If you came here, I'd say, Rick, we're going to get up really early. We're going to get up there for daybreak. We're going to sit up there and we might see one. I would never go, I'm going out to see a bear. It's never going to happen. It's too hard.
Thank you very much for going into all these topics. The emotional stuff is part of what it's all about. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
In terms of the British situation of big cats, how would you relate to it coming back to Britain if you were going to spend any time here? What's your thoughts on it?
If I was coming back to Britain, Rick, I'd get hold of you and I'd go, do you know anybody local to the area I'm in that's got an interest in this? Because I would go out with them. I would definitely have an interest. I think they've been here for decades and they've really not caused too much bother. I know some farmers might disagree with that. Like we've said before a couple of times, I think they behave differently there to what they do here. I can tell you now, when hunting season comes here, good luck trying to find a deer or anything like that. They're gone. It's almost like there's a biological clock. The animals just disappear. It's uncanny how it happens. It's like the forest is completely devoid of wildlife. But you don't have that in the UK. You don't have hunting anywhere near the same. I've heard on your podcast many a time the witness saying it walked along so confidently, so majestic, it had no fear of me. Because I don't believe it has fear of you, but in the same way it won't trouble you because it knows it doesn't need to trouble you.
Back in Britain, you'd want to help sort of learn about them, investigate and try and find evidence for them.
Oh, I would, yeah, without question. I would contact you and say, Rick, is there anyone in this area who's got an interest? And I would get in touch with them and say, look, I'll come out with you. So I definitely would, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And the final bit we have is just a little bit of snippet where we're going to sort of put you on the spot, but not ask for a definitive judgment, because as we were preparing for this recording, we got a few days ago through a couple of listeners, and we're very grateful to them for sharing the footage they got on a night vision camera. In Devon it was, and we're going to show it on the website to go out with this episode. And it's something that you've seen, just a snippet of a guy walking up to this cat-shaped head on his night vision. Turns round a different angle past the tree and into the edge of a woodland, and there seems to be a pretty large-looking cat with a long, thick, tubular tail, perhaps with something in its mouth. It just quickly bound away. So it's only a glimpse, but it's well worth looking at. And I thought, let's give it to Rob for his impression. Tell us what you thought of it.
Yeah, so you kindly showed me that it was Thursday, wasn't it, Rick? And I was at work at the time because of the time difference. I was quickly looking at it in between patients. And I must admit, initially, I was like, I always look at things like that and think, wait a minute, what am I looking at? Because I'm just not familiar at infrared or night visioning. And those last few seconds, I actually went out loud in my room. I went, whoa, because to me, that is a large cat. And at one point, that cat, when it turns, I think it's the light. If you concentrate on those last 5 seconds, it turns, it completely obscures that carcass. And then it seems to pick the carcass up and move with it. And it picks it up so easy. But I thought, really long tail, the shape and everything. I've not seen a cougar in the flesh, but I've looked at so many images. I thought that's a big cat. And interestingly, Rick, it was a stroke of luck. One of my last patients of the day is a hunter. I know him quite well. And I thought, right, I'm going to call his bluff here. And I said, have a look at this. And I showed him it. And he went, oh, is this your footage? And I just said, no, it's a friend's. And I watched him. And initially he went, oh, I've just got to get my glasses on. And he sat there and he looked at his glasses. And I was watching his expressions. And then he went, yeah, it's pretty cool. And he handed me the phone. And I went, it's good, isn't it? And he went, yeah. And I went, what is it? And he went, what do you mean, what is it? It's a cat. I went, a cat? He went, yeah, cougar. And I went, cougar? And he went, yeah, you know that, right? And I said, well, I'm not sure. And I still didn't tell him. I said, so you think it's a cougar? He went, yeah, that's cougar. And then he went, where was this taken? Up the Lake Road or wherever you? And I said, it was taken in England. I won't tell you the language he used, but he was in disbelief. He said, are you serious? And I actually, Rick, had to show him our WhatsApp message and how it was sent, and then show him the link to Big Cat Conversations. He said, you have cougar in England. And I went, there are big cats in England, not just cougar. I went, there's reports of black panther and lynx. And then he went, but that's not normal. And I said, well, it is and it isn't. And he was amazed. And I said to him, so you don't think that's a feral cat? He laughed. He said, no. He said, that's a cougar. He went, listen, buddy. He said, if you just showed me that and you said you took that up the Lake Road or this trail, I wouldn't be disputing it at all. And yeah, he was really amazed at it. He said, actually, I showed him the podcast thing and he said, oh, I've got to look into this. Yeah, he was amazed. But he said, cougar.
I think that's a very good test, isn't it, to get that spontaneous judgment from somebody who doesn't know the background, doesn't know where it is. Very naughty of you, Rob, but very good of you. Please pass on our thanks.
He just couldn't get over it.
Yeah, and he's seen them in the wild, presumably, in British Columbia.
He's actually shot one. Yeah, he's had to shoot one, and he's seen a couple, but he had like a deer kill. He was gutting the deer and preparing it because you've got to do it on the spot. And this thing was coming in. He said, this was going to go for me. He had his young son with him at the time as well. So he said I had no option.
Okay. That sort of thing is going to happen sometimes in part of the world where you live.
Yeah. That footage, for me, all the stills were fascinating as well.
Very nice to have your view on that and to his view. So please pass on our thanks to him. Very nice little anecdote to add into the equation. The guys' scaling exercise, because they're going to go back in the daytime, try and do what they can to get a good gauge of the scale based on reference points that are at the scene in daylight. And they're going to look for any bones that are there to match up with bones that we think are in that footage as well. That'll be very helpful.
I think, look at the UK, rule out the usual candidates. And then once you've done that, then look at what you're left with. But hopefully they find some really decent sign. I might eat my words, but for me, that's a big cat.
Great. Well, thank you for that view on it. And thanks again to those guys for providing it, because wonderful for us to have that to make our own judgments and to consider. And so there'll be that video, and it's the last few seconds, as Rob said, and there's a few isolated stills. We're very grateful to Don, who did the thermal footage in Derbyshire. He's very experienced in isolating some of the stills from the footage and then zooming in sometimes to have a good look at some of the key moments. Rob, I think we better let you get on with the day over there in Canada and get out with your hike. I think we're both flagging. We've been going for a good while, but it's been so good to cover all these aspects of life, living on the edge of real wilderness like you do, and all the interesting parts of the natural world that, influence the whole human condition for you. And when you're back in Britain, even for a break, do look us up and we'll try and match you up with some local investigators who could show you their own local big cat country, wherever they are in Britain.
Your podcast is great. I love listening to it. It does make me a bit homesick, particularly when I hear the Devon accents and even the Midland accent. If I ever get any really good footage of something, I'll send it you. And Rick, if you're ever out this way, like I say, we are not far from Vancouver at all. We've got plenty of room for people to stay. Come and find us and we'll get you up there I'll give you a bear spray and we'll see what we come across.
Wonderful. And I know how superb that part of the world is, including Vancouver Island. Had a few days on Vancouver Island. It is very, very special and so different inland from the coast. I hope I can take you up on that one day, Rob, and we'll do something for the podcast from over there back to here in Britain. But
yeah.
Great. For now, Rob, thanks ever so much for coming on Big Cat Conversations.
It's my pleasure, Rick, and hope you and your listeners all stay healthy and well.
Okay, so there's a fair few things to view on the website for this episode, both from Rob with photos from British Columbia, Canada, and from Devon with the footage we've just mentioned and the stills extracted from it. Hope all that's of interest, and you can find it under episode 86 on the references and links page of the Big Cat Conversations website. Our poetry and limericks are all in now, so we should have some results in the next couple of episodes. Thanks to everyone who made a contribution, and thanks to the judges from the Facebook groups. Coming up, we will have an episode catching up with events in Scotland, and we also have a guest from Ireland to hear from, because he saw 2 adult big black cats in Southern Ireland last month, October 2022. They were lying down in grass as he shone his spotlight into the pasture, and he noticed a smaller one behind them. That's a remarkable encounter that we'll hear all about, and he's someone who's an experienced stalker. So both Scotland and Ireland are coming our way soon. Okay, we're closing out now, so thanks again to Rob, our guest from British Columbia, and of course a big thanks to our contacts who provided the footage from Devon. Look forward to being back with you soon. Thanks for listening, take care, and bye for now.